So I'll never forget it. When I was a kid, I grew up in Baltic, but I lived in Sugar Creek after I was age 8, and we're driving from Baltic to Sugar Creek, which you had to do because there was nothing in Baltic. There was a gas station, a restaurant, but anything else was in Sugar Creek. So anyway, my entire family, my mom, dad, sister, we're driving to Sugar Creek, and all of a sudden we are just passed by, I think it was a Ford Bronco. Now this is back in the day, so there was a Ford Bronco that just went barreling past us. I mean, it was just the loudest noise ever, and I don't know, the speed limit was 50 maybe back then, slower, I don't know. And this guy just barreled around us going 80 miles an hour. And, I'll never forget this, and I have no idea why. Maybe God used that scenario for a life application here 20, 30 years later. My dad says, you're going to see that guy alongside of the road. You're going to see him alongside of the road because he's going to run out all of his gas driving like that. That thing's probably a V8. He's going 80 miles an hour. Brake lights are going on around turns, back on the gas. So he's going to run out of gas. You're going to see him. And it's so funny that he said that because maybe 5 minutes later, we see this Ford Bronco on the side of the road putting along by the white line going 10 or 15 miles an hour. It's almost as if my dad was in on that and he knew what was going to happen. But again, it's funny because it's almost as if God caused that to happen for a life application. And so we see this guy, clearly he ran out of gas. I don't remember if his engine was smoking or anything like that, but he had clearly ran out of gas, and he drove past us, and it was just a blink of an eye, he was gone. And out of first instinct, we would say, hey, if this were a race, who's going to win? And it would be clear. We would say, well, the Bronco's going to win, right? I mean, he's going 80, you're going 50, you're eating his brake dust right now, his fumes. So yeah, what kind of fool would think that you would win the race going your slow, steady pace of 50 miles an hour? So let me transition this. Let me transition this a little bit to the book of Hebrews, and I'll show you where I'm going. Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. So, let us run the race marked out for us with perseverance. So what I want to talk to you today briefly about is perseverance. What I want to talk to you about today is how sometimes in life we can get tangled up in the wrong things at the wrong time. And those can cause us to use our energy in an inefficient way. The very energy, the very blood in our bones, the very heart that God has given us can be used for evil if we're not careful. So let us run the race with perseverance. So I don't know about you, but Paul talks about in the Bible about the battle of the flesh and the mind. He talks about wanting to do something and doing the complete opposite. And there's this war, in the book of Romans, Paul talks about this war that is raging inside of him. So I used to live in a bigger city, and now I live in a small town. And one of the biggest conclusions that I can draw, or if I could summarize the last few years of my life living here, I would say that it's a different pace of life. People tend to move slower, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. People tend to have, in general, I'm generalizing things, not stereotyping, but people tend to focus on different things. Now, while we have the keeping up with the Joneses aspect, the keeping up with the neighbors, and living that fast-paced lifestyle, you see hints of that everywhere. But I saw it the most where I used to live, and I don't see it as much now. Now, there's nothing wrong with material success. There's nothing wrong with that. I believe that God wants us to be wealthy in all aspects of life. But what happens is you can run toward the wrong thing. And if you run toward the wrong thing, that's not God's will, it's the opposite of God's will for your life, what you'll quickly find is that you will never have enough. That your body, your brain, your mind, your heart, your eyes, all of your senses will never have enough. And what happens to that perseverance, that calm, quiet, gentle spirit that you once had, you'll see that dissipate, and you'll start to run a sprint in a marathon type of race. You'll start to sprint, and that will leave you feeling tired and weary and distant from God and angry at God and mad. You may even destroy your friends and your family in the process. And so at the end of the day, you'll get what you want, but you'll realize that you're thirsty again. You still want more. It's like the woman at the well when Jesus says to her, clearly a woman with a past, he says to her that she's not going to be thirsty if she drinks the water he has to drink. So you think of these water stations along the marathon races that are set out everywhere, and these water stations are meant to rehydrate and to nourish the body to press on toward the next checkpoint. Now, these people that are running these marathons, the secret to it is they're not sprinting, they're persevering, and they're depending on those stations to refuel and to rehydrate. So part of that perseverance is just knowing that God is always with you, God is there to give you the fuel that you need and the resources that you need, but you've got to persevere, and you've got to run at a pace that is in conjunction with His will. The scariest place that you can be is outside of God's will, because you'll find yourself gassed and just out of breath. So I just wanted to share that story with you today, that we should throw off everything that entangles us, everything that puts weight on us, everything that slows us down, everything that speeds us up, you could say, to throw off everything that is outside of God's will. Because if the quickest way to find out who you are apart from God is to take your eyes off of Him and run in the opposite direction. The quickest way to find out who you are in the flesh is to take God's will and to throw it away and to only focus on things that you want to do. It will leave you gassed, it will leave you tired, it will leave you out of breath, and hopefully returning to the Father.